Hello, I'm Dr. Lisa Belisle, and you are listening to or watching Radio Maine. Today it is my great pleasure to speak with another doctor, Dr. Louis Nadelson, who is joining us from the great state of Arkansas. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure for being here. I really appreciate the invitation and look forward to our conversation.
Yes. So you are, I have to say this right up front, you are the chair of my dissertation committee for the doctorate that I've been working on. Also a professor in several of the classes that I've taken in the doctorate through the University of Arkansas. So this is a slightly different conversation we're having, but I wanted people to understand that context that you and I have worked together for about 2 years-ish, really, at this point. But little did I know that behind all of your academic achievements, and you are a prodigious writer and publisher of academic pieces, you also are a creative to a pretty significant magnitude. It's amazing.
Thank you. I have lots of interests, and I like to explore, and create is something I really, really enjoy doing. And so finding outlets for doing that is something that fulfills me deeply.
So there's two areas that I want to make sure we talk about. And one of them is your music. And one of them are the creations that you bring to life out of essentially found objects. And since this is a show about creativity, and we're going to talk about art, let's talk about that first. You started bringing things into you and I will have weekly conversations about mostly dissertation stuff. And you started showing me things when you heard that I had an affiliation with the art gallery. Like, look at this table that I made out of a wagon wheel. You started showing me these things. I was like, wait, who is this person? This is such a different person than the person that, was teaching the class in leadership that I took. So how did you first get into making things out of farm implements and other found objects?
I've always admired art, but I haven't really engaged in it. I've always liked to build things and make things. And so I've built houses. I've built 2 houses from the ground up. I've remodeled, 15 houses, gutting several of those down to the studs, moving walls, and pouring new concrete and so forth. And so that's a creative process as well for building things. But actually, my wife, who's also a doctor, Dr. Sandra Nadelson, she took an artistic welding class about 25 years ago. And, I just thought, she's dabbling in it. And she came home and said, like, hey, I think we need to get a welder because I'm really liking this. And it's like, okay. And then I watched her weld for a moment, and it's just like, oh, teach me. I instantly gravitated toward that. And so, teach me this. And so she taught me, and the next semester, these are personal enrichment classes, these kind of continuing education classes. I took the class with her, and I gained a lot of skills. And at the same time, we were out driving around Washington State, and we came across a sculpture garden made of found objects as well, which we've been dabbling in. And this sculpture garden was remarkable. And so we went to this, walked around this sculpture garden, about 5 acres, with these remarkable big sculptures. And asked, started wandering around, and saw this guy welding there. And I said, hey, we're looking for the owner of this. We'd like to talk to him. It's like, okay, what do you want to say? And it's like, well, are you the owner? He's like, yeah. And I said, are you also the artist? He's like, yeah. His name's Dan Kleinert. And Dan's been nationally, internationally recognized for his art. And we have, to this day, are close friends. And we've built a relationship. And so we would go and hang out with him when we were living in Washington State in his studio and spend 2-3 days just creating. He's working on his work, and I'm working on mine, and we talk to each other and give each other ideas. And, he's got this big scrap yard, and we go out and find things. And as we're finding them, it's like getting new ideas. And so that was kind of my early experience with that. And since then, I've just really fell in love with it. And the creativity. Another inspiration that I took was when we lived in Nevada, in Las Vegas. There's a lot of petroglyphs and those rock art that's around that area. And so I got really inspired by Southwest, particularly indigenous art. And I've made multiple cocopellis and other kinds of kind of what I would consider modeling after that rock art. And so, one of the pieces that I sent to you, it's kind of a piece that's mounted on a. It's actually mounted on an old cellar door, is what that is. And that piece, and that it was modeled after that same kind of form and idea from that rock art. And so that's been a real inspiration. But I take it also, I've always been, I grew up in the Church of Nature, is what I say. When everybody else was going to church on Sundays, we were going to hiking and in the mountains and, wherever else, out in the prairie or wherever else. I grew up in Denver area and in Colorado. And so spent an awful lot of time outside, deep, deep respect for nature and deep, really passionate about that. So I take a lot of inspiration from that as well. And so you'll see that in some of my art as well. Birds and fish and other kinds of critters that I really tried to model and tried to create that form, and yet try to be whimsical about some of it as well. Don't take it too serious and don't try to make it authentic, but to try to provide that form, but also that kind of artistic expression. And so, one of the pictures I sent to you, it was a little subtle, but it was a bird that's on a rock, and we were in central Utah, in Price, Utah, and there was a rock shop there, and went in, and here was this kind of slab of rock with bird prints in it, and they're fossilized bird prints. And so it's like, I brought that. I thought that was so cool, and I brought it home, and I had that bird, and it's like that bird's feet looked almost like the bird feet that are on that rock, and so I put them together there for that. But once again, taking that inspiration from nature and getting some ideas from that as well.
So I'm assuming that this early interest in nature at least had some influence on your decision as an undergraduate to focus on science.
Absolutely. And I had my first kind of regular job, mowing lawns and doing those other kinds of things as kids. But the first one was I actually was working in a large veterinary animal practice. And when I say large, not large animals, a large practice. There were 7 veterinarians and 120 cages in this building, and a couple operating rooms, and X-ray room, and 7 or 8 exam rooms. I mean, it was a big practice, and so I really got interested in the medicine part of working with animals as well. And so I thought, oh, I want to become a veterinarian, but I worked there for 7 years, and it's like by the time it was time to apply for veterinary school, it's like I don't know if I want to continue doing this, because there's so many other interests that I had. And so, but in the meantime, I had taken such a wide variety of classes, from microbiology, herpetology, developmental biology, and so forth. And all of those kept feeding together to build this bigger and bigger picture of understanding nature, the botany and and ethnobotany, and to really understand and delve deeper into nature, uh, really um, influenced my desire to become a teacher, and that I taught biology for several years at the high school level, as well as physics and chemistry and so forth. Just kind of some of those natural sciences. And so, yeah, that definitely influenced me, was my appreciation for nature, and not just animals, but the physical world as well.
And then as you're moving through, you do focus on quite a bit of educational work, and you ended up, it looks like you actually went for one doctorate, completed the coursework, and then switched to a different doctorate. Apparently, I would assume you'd have to go through all the coursework for that, plus your dissertation at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and in educational psychology. And your dissertation was Pre-Service Teachers' Understanding of Evolution, Nature of Science, and Situations of Chance, which I just, again, find so fascinating. Like there's so many different kind of threads that you've kind of woven together to create not only your current creative artistic life, but also your current academic life.
And once again, that kind of is reflective of my interest. And I had somebody, I was telling them, there many different places I've worked and my different degrees and so forth. They were kind of talking to me about some of that. And he says, "So you moved a lot, and you've gone to many places and so forth." And said, "So you just can't keep a job, right?" Which was kind of funny, but it's not that I get bored, it's other opportunities come up, and it's like, "Ooh, I wonder if." And so I think, that's that recent book about Fred Rogers, when you wonder, you're learning. And so I fully embrace that idea. When I wonder, I've learned. And so by, trying all these different things and exploring all these different ideas, I've grown so much, um, mentally, emotionally, uh, for my career as well, a little bit, definitely in that. But I think that more of it's been much more personal than professional in the motivation for exploring all these different areas.
Well, I love that. And I remember in a couple of the courses that I took with you early on, there was this running theme of not yet. We're not there yet. It's always a growth mindset. It's always, what are we learning here? Which I think really is a very specific and, for me, a very relatable approach to just life in general. Like, you're never going to learn all the stuff. So keep kind of, as you're going along, just being open to what's in front of you, and what can you bring into your existence that creates maybe intellectual curiosity, maybe some level of happiness. But I think what I've noticed in some people in academics, not all, I know that there's a lot of different ways to approach academia, is that some people feel more comfortable like getting more and more narrowed in focus, so that they're kind of at the pinnacle and they spend many, many years studying exactly one thing forever. And I've been somewhat jealous of that because that seems a little bit less challenging than all the squirrels that I keep wanting to, chase into the trees. And at the same time, it's so different than the way that I approach things.
Yeah, and I'm with you on the squirrels. That um, there's, I think that there's the two extremes on that is the field view, an inch deep, a mile wide, or the post hole view of a mile deep and an inch wide. And those are the two kind of extremes with that. And I definitely lead to that field view of, I want to know a little bit, because I can't know it all. And I could be really, really, gain real deep knowledge of something, but it's at the cost of learning some other things there that I really want to explore. And so, for me, with that growth mindset of not yet, I can continue to learn and I may continue to develop deeper skills and deeper knowledge of some areas. But at the same time, I want to be exploring all these other areas that come up as well. And so, as long as you're talking about my CV and professional and so forth, if you look, I've published with over 200 people, which is unusual, but I enjoy, people come like you came to me with these ideas, and it's just like, sure, because I know I'll learn from that process with it, and it's interesting to me. Now some people have come to me with ideas, and it's just like, I just didn't resonate with me, which is, it's been those I can count on probably one hand. It's a rare event. But the opportunity, and then working with different people, of course, I learn from them as well. I've learned a lot working with you as well. Just some different ideas and a little bit more about medicine and so forth as well. But other ideas as well that you've brought and really got me thinking about change and leading through change and so forth in ways that I hadn't really contemplated before. And so we've explored a lot of different areas together. And I don't know if I would have come up with that myself. But when other people bring ideas to me, it's like, of course, I'll jump in and do that because I want to learn too.
And I do love that idea of learning and education, and that it's sort of mutually beneficial, and that it's an iterative process. And I took a different course with a different professor, and there was a lot of conversation around kind of ways that education maybe doesn't work so well. And the sort of sage on the stage where I'm going to bring knowledge into a situation and you are going to get the knowledge from me, which I have to say, and at least in my early medical education, there was a lot of that. And I've seen a lot of sage on the stage stuff, and it still exists in medicine. And for me, I think, well, wait a minute. If I'm always just showing up myself and saying, I know everything and you get to absorb it from me, then what's the ability that I have to actually gain from that situation? I just become more deeply entrenched in my own thoughts and patterns and presentation. So for me, that just doesn't seem like that much fun. And apparently, scientifically, it doesn't bear out that that's actually a very useful way for many people to learn anyway.
It's a terrible way for most people to learn, to sit and listen. I mean, it's just, the kind of one-way processing. And it's, what we know about how people learn, it just is uh, it, it, it's antithetical to the evidence of what we know about is effective for people learning. So, which is interesting. But, I think you brought up a really good point about that exchange, that both of, that opportunity to learn from each other. Um, and it's also learning on a personal level about how to connect with different people, how to communicate with different people, how to work with different people, and because people have different styles, and some of them have been more challenging for me than others, just because it wasn't that the person was challenging, it was they were just different than I was accustomed to. So I had to really push myself to get out of my comfort zone to really be able to work with these folks and understand, you know, I'm trying to get them to form to what I want them to be rather than me adapting to who they are. And I think that also goes back to the art too, about, I can change some things, but there's some things I cannot change. And so it's either I've got to adapt to it, or um, it's not going to work. And so um, uh, uh, my buddy Dan Klenner said to me long ago, almost soon after I met him, um, he said that he had a Native American tell him, he said, when you push, things push back. But when you stand back and let things flow, they flow. And so I've tried to, and my wife has reminded me of that many times as I get anxious and try to move things along. And she's like, "You're pushing and it's pushing back." It's like, "Oh, don't use that against me because I know it's true." But it's, when something's not working, it's usually because I'm pushing too hard and I've got to sometimes step back and let things flow. And I think that the reason why I'll push frequently is I have this vision, this goal in mind, this vision of this is what it's going to look like when it's done. And here I want to see it. And, because this is going to be really, a great thing. And yet it's part of the process is the journey. And I've got to keep that in mind as well. And so, I'm it's only taken, I don't know, many years for me to figure that out. And I'm still learning it. But I mean, it's part of the lifelong, it's part of the human condition and lifelong learning. Um, and so it's better than if you don't learn it, I think.
Well, you told me this great story about a found object that you had wanted to make into a table. And then you realized that as you're putting the top on the table is moving. And you said to yourself, well, either I can turn this into a trick table in which
Yeah,
people put their glasses on it and then the glasses fall off, or
that's
I can make it into a kinetic sculpture and I can do with it what it wants to have done, right? So I think that's a great example of what you're describing. You're pushing it into one form and it's saying, but that's not the form I'm meant to be. I'm meant to be something else.
yeah. I was going to name that the table as I think I kidded with you. I was going to name it sobriety test. Um, to kind of this table that move, and if you're having a hard time keeping track of it, it's probably time to, to back away in many ways. But that was actually that's the second time that's happened in about 6 months. I also started making a table base out of a chain, and I welded each of the links together, and I had it spiral up. And I get it, and I started putting the top on, and I realized it's moving all over. And once again, going, "Oh, I wanted this to be a table, and it would be so cool as a table." And yet it's saying, you know, and I could have made that chain rigid, and I could have, welded some other things on there to make it, but it's so much more beautiful and so much more fun as a kinetic sculpture. And so, to embrace that as an opportunity rather than a problem, that kind of entrepreneurial mindset of, you know, taking those risks to try new things like that is art, in doing the art. But then, when you're faced with a situation, not seeing it as a failure, but as an opportunity, how can I take advantage of this situation? And so I've done that a lot, and I've had some sculptures where I went down one direction, or some piece of art that went down one direction, and it just wasn't working, and I put it aside and let it, and um, ruminate on it for a while, and then come back and go, I know what I can do with that. And so giving it some time and space and letting it, kind of think about things for a while, and use my imagination, I think is really, really important part of that. And in many ways, uh, once again, that pushing thing again, standing back and letting it flow. And so that certainly um, has been more fruitful than pushing, that's for sure.
So I remember at the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned two things I wanted to talk about. And one, I think we've certainly discussed at some length, although I'm sure we could keep talking for hours. But the other is the music. And for me, this is really interesting because you are a musician of stringed instruments, but not just one stringed instrument. You have many stringed instruments, and in particular, you have one that not many people would think about using on a regular basis. Tell me about that.
I've got one right here in my office here. I keep one in my office because I'll play it when I have a break or I need just a mind break. And so if you got just a moment, I'll go grab it.
Of course.
Um, it's called a mountain dulcimer or a lap dulcimer, and uh, it's played typically as sitting on one's lap, but it can also be put on a tabletop and played on the tabletop as well. I don't know if I can, I don't think I can do that quite there, but played on a tabletop there. And so with this, then there are typically there's 3 strings, 4 strings, 6 strings. There's different configurations of these, but there's a melody, a harmony, and a bass for these. Now they can be tuned in different keys. This one of the most common tunings is a DAD, so D, A, D. And so, and then the fret, it works very much like the fret of other instruments like, the guitar or, mandolin or some other instrument that has frets like that, banjo and so forth with it, for forming the different notes. And so these can be picked. So, if I was to play something picked, it could be something like, or it can be strummed. So it could be something more like this. Now, I started playing this about a year ago, and so and I've taken a couple of lessons. I'm taking, I meet every other week now for about 45 minutes with a teacher, and I think that this is one of those things for me that is really interesting. I was reflecting back. My mom and stepdad, when I was probably about 8 years old, took a class when in Denver on making dulcimers, and I never heard them really play them, but I saw them, making them and so forth with that. And they made a couple of them, and then that was done, and they were on to whatever else the next hobby was there. Um, but I thought, what an opportunity had I played it then. I'd probably be you know teaching the lessons instead of taking the lessons. But the nice thing about it, and like I said, I picked it up about a year ago, and is it's humbling because I'm pretty successful at most of the other things I do. And then to pick this up, it's like, okay, now I'm kind of, I don't want to say starting over, but starting definitely at a very, very novice level. But I keep on reminding myself is something that I tell my students, and I've talked to you about as well in one of the classes, is expertise is a long-term process. And the kind of the rule of thumb is 5 years or 10,000 hours of concentrated practice. And so, when I practice a half hour a day, 5 days a week, I have many, many years to go to get to the level of being expert. But I'm getting to the level where I'm feeling it's fun and I'm not frustrated when I'm playing. And once again, that frustration is pushing. I want to be good at this instead of going. This is a journey, not a destination. And so that's been a really interesting part of this process. But I think that this instrument is just such a beautiful sounding instrument as well. a lot of the music that we're playing, some of it's folk music. And I say we're playing because my wife started this about a year and a half ago during, it's kind of toward the tail end of the pandemic. And she started taking some classes and got into it. And I was, starting to pick my guitar back up at the time and working, and really refining some of my guitar skills. And then she started doing this. It's like, after a while, I got so intrigued. It's like, okay, I want to do it too, because it's something we do together, which is really fun as well. And so now we have some jam groups that we jam with every week. There's a couple of different groups that we go to, and we've made friends through this circle. And one of the kind of meccas for dulcimer and dulcimer playing is actually here in Arkansas, and it's in Mountain View, Arkansas. And that's actually where this instrument was made, is at the dulcimer shop there. And it's a McSpadden dulcimer is what it is. And so we've taken lessons up there and gone to some of the events up there and so forth too, and connected with the community there as well. So yeah, so it's a fun journey. I just think that um, once again, it's an opportunity for me to continue to learn, and I got to keep on reminding myself, as you've brought up, not yet.
Well, and hopefully maybe not ever, right? I mean, once we decide we're done, we've learned all that we need to learn. I guess we all might as well just hang it up, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think that the people that I've seen that are Dwayne Porterfield is a guy here that we've taken lessons with up in Mountain View, a national champion for dulcimer, lap dulcimer, or the mountain dulcimer, and he stays fresh by continuing to play new songs and making new music, and real inspiration that way too. And I think that you become expert at playing, but I think that when you do that, you continue to push yourself in new ways, and that's very true for me professionally in exploring new ideas. Where there's some people, it's like I don't have any expertise in that. It's like, good, I can learn. For me, not to have an expertise in an area is not an excuse for me not to get involved in a project. I've published a research piece with an attorney, and which we were looking at court cases and comparing different court cases. And I have, my legal background is, I don't have one. And so, but I learned a lot from doing that. But that was, once again, I brought to the table publishing skills, writing skills, this kind of organizational skills that are required for putting together a publishable article. And so I bring that there, but then I get to learn all kinds of things as well. So it's, once again, it's a little like working with you, mutually beneficial. And that's true with these musical instruments as well, I think.
Dr. Nadelson, it's truly been a pleasure to spend time talking about a lot more of the creative aspects of the life that you live, in addition to all the time that you and I spend talking about the academic issues that we do. I know that you're hoping to have a show, which many people who are watching or listening to this may not be able to get to because I believe it's in Arkansas, but it's going to be this fall, correct?
Yeah, I'm hoping, two of the things that I'm looking at, and I just haven't had time to do this, but I've got to get it organized soon because opportunities close up when you don't get in early on them sometimes. But one of them is Art Walk here in Conway. Happens the first Monday of first Friday of each month. And so I'm hoping that I can do a show or two uh, at First Friday in the near future. I've got to look into it. I've done some shows in the past, but none of them in Arkansas. We did some in when we were in Nevada. We did some when we were in Washington State, um, but I haven't done any for a while. So, but my shop is filling up with pieces, so I've got to either start giving them away or find new owners for them or something there because I'm going to run out of space, and I have a large shop, so it's time to kind of move some things along.
Okay. Well, we won't hold you to the possibility of being in an art walk show, but we will hold open the possibility that you will be in one. So for
Yeah,
those
that sounds
people,
good.
yes. So for
Yeah.
those people who are listening to or watching Radio Maine and happen to be in Arkansas at the time that your pieces are there, they will have the opportunity to interact with your pieces and hopefully you.
I would look forward to that. That would be delightful.
I appreciate again the chance to talk with you more about other aspects of your life in addition to the academic pursuits. And I've been speaking, for those of you who've been watching, with Dr. Louis Nadelson, who is a professor at the University of Central Arkansas and also a creative to a pretty high degree. I'm Dr. Lisa Belisle, and you've been listening to or watching Radio Maine. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been a delightful conversation. I really appreciate it.